Welcome to the Soldiers and Sailors Monument podcast. My name is Greg Palumbo. I'm the executive director of the Soldiers and Sailors Monument. Today we're going to travel back in time to 1865 in April with my guest, President Abraham Lincoln. Hello, sir. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having this conversation with me.
May I congratulate you on the end of our long national nightmare and the preservation of the Union.
You certainly may. You find me a very happy man today with that surrender and the coming surrenders of the other two armies that are out there. This country, after 4 years, will be at peace.
4 years ago, when Fort Sumter fell, did you expect the war to lag on this long?
No, no, I didn't expect a war at all. And when they fired on Sumter, declaring war, I had declared that I would never fire the first shot in a war. But our initial call up to replenish our army was only for 90-day enlistments, which should tell you what I expected. I think what they did was just go too far. I think that they may have thought that with that we would say that they were sincere and had not expected us to respond as we did and start something that no one knew how to end at that time. We didn't have to go to war. Our sticky issue was slavery. I had no plans as elected to summarily end it, of course. No plans at all. I wanted to end slavery. I wanted to end slavery since the time I was a child in Kentucky and saw men enslaved. I wanted to do it gradually so we didn't have a war.
That being said, there are those that felt you may have gone too far with emancipation of the slaves, but the passing of the 13th Amendment,
Right?
uh, do you feel that you were justified in making that move?
I was for several reasons. One, frankly, was military. They had begun to use slaves in their armies, uh, and we, on the other hand, were using slaves, former slaves at that point, in our army. So it was partly a military decision. But frankly, and I think history will see that I was looking for an opportunity to do that, and I did it. I did it with the power of being the commander in chief of the army. Now I am criticized. Well, he did not go far enough. He didn't go, he went too far. Uh, I did what was right within the law of the United States. As commander in chief, I could only emancipate slaves in those states that were at war with us. And I did it. And I'm proud to have done it.
Many Southerners believe that your election alone signaled the inevitable emancipation of the slaves. What were your views on the colored people before the war, and how are your views changed during the war?
As I say, I saw slavery up close in Kentucky. I saw it even closer one time when a friend of mine and I took flatboats. We had live pigs there and some other items such as that, some equipment, and we floated down the Mississippi and took it to New Orleans. And our eyes were boggled. We had never seen a town like that with all that it had to offer. And one day, walking, we turned a corner and we were there in a slave market. Men, women, and children were brought up on a stage and auctioned off as if they were cattle. Uh, my view on slavery, of course, it never should have been. It's an insult to humanity. And I had looked throughout my career to end it, but I was not elected. They said now that Lincoln is elected, he's going to end slavery. I had no intention at all like that. I think if my main competitor, William Seward, had been elected, I think they would have said the same thing about him. And I think that they would have been closer to being right, actually. the 1850s uh, showed us a buildup. They were a buildup to what finally happened in April of 1861. As you know, Stephen Douglas and I had those debates in 1858, which sort of showed what a war would be all about, and positions stiffened.
Even before your debates with Douglas, you did do a lot of speaking tours about your positions on slavery and the ending of slavery, and not proliferating it into the West, particularly into Kansas and Missouri. Do you feel like the compromise, the Great Compromise, should have happened at that point? Do you think that's when we should have dealt with this on the get-go? Do you think there's any point where you could have compromised to prevent the war?
Uh, to the last question, no, because the issue was slavery. We had negotiated through several areas of people. This was strange. It was a civil war. Representatives of ours were Americans. We were dealing with other Americans. But no, they would not compromise at all on slavery. We had a meeting just this past February, beginning of February, with representatives, including the vice president, on a vote. They came up through the lines to meet with us, and Jefferson Davis had told them, "You cannot do anything on slavery." So the meeting basically was worthless. But getting back to your question about the Kansas-Nebraska Act, before that, it replaced something called the Missouri Compromise. And the Missouri Compromise dated back a few decades. And basically, what it said was where slavery is in the South, it could exist. It made no mention of going forward to these new territories becoming slaves. And then, largely due to Stephen Douglas, that was eliminated. And he had to come up with the Nebraska Kansas Act, which he called it popular sovereignty, which essentially meant people in those territories could vote whether it be slavery or not. And I could not stand that. The Missouri Compromise was like a dam.
Mm.
It was holding slavery in its place. I could not stand the fact that they might extend a horrible institution into the West. So, and that's much of what Mr. Douglas and I, Senator Douglas and I, debated on.
Yeah. So war comes to our country. We are going to settle that great debate for slavery. Took you some time to find the man that would settle that debate for you, though. You went through several generals.
Hmm. Yes.
What was it about General Grant um, that the other commanders didn't have? And how was your relationship with Grant been?
General Grant was picked, and this may all sound ridiculous. He fights. He fights the enemy. We had originally had appointed by me um, McClellan, George McClellan, and he was a man that stood out at the first of the war. He had engaged in a small engagement in West Virginia, and so he was a winner at that point. So he was made commander. He was a man of well, great ego. And you may have to cut out part of this in your when you write this up. I mean, no insult, yeah, at least public insult. He was a man who it was said could strut sitting down. And someone else said, "Well, yeah, he looks like he looks pretty good on a horse." Someone else countered. He said, "Yeah, horses' asses always do look better on horses." Uh, but to get to the point, he was a man who could build an army, and he did that. But he was so slow in using it, and history will record that. that really, if he had acted sooner, there would have not been such a war. And I replaced him finally, and then had need to bring him back. And that was really political and partly for the morale of the army. And then I got rid of him again. Of course, he faced me for the presidency last year. Uh, I'm proud to say I beat him pretty good.
You did.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Grant fights. I did not know him when I appointed him. I knew what he was doing, and he was a winner. He was a winner. And one big difference that it showed immediately is when other armies would fight, uh, win or lose, they would withdraw.
mm,
And eyes were on Grant after one of those battles, the Wilderness.
mm.
They had a hard time in the Wilderness. Their armies went that way, and our armies went that way with them. They didn't pull back. We were fortunate in the North to have many more men than the South did. We could replenish men. We didn't have to go back and repair an army to go forward. And that was it. That's what Grant did. He never gave up, determined perseveration until Lee was in siege at Petersburg.
Mm. The battlefront is not the only place that you surrounded yourself with the right people, albeit not without challenges.
Yes.
Your cabinet is made up of men that have not always been the biggest supporters. Uh, why did you choose such a group of rivals to be your trusted advisors?
They were good men. They were experienced men and had knowledge of different facets of government. As someone coming from the West, without that experience in the capital, I felt if I had any ego in that regard, I pushed it aside. And Seward was, as I said earlier, my main competitor, and he was a good man. I think he would have made a good president. Maybe not at that particular time. He may be a good president in the future. So I picked him, the Secretary of State. And then Chase was a man that also wanted the presidency and always couldn't quite reach there. Chase is a good man, and again, some of this they have to edit a bit, edit a bit. But frankly, he kept on wanting it while he served in my cabinet.
Mm.
Little groups that Will Lincoln run in 1864, and if I hadn't, I think Chase would have been right there. He's a good man. He's a man somewhat in the ego department like McClellan. Someone once said of him, he thinks there's four people in the Trinity.
Chase, along with John Sherman, really helped to establish the banking system that we're using today. How did it feel to be your picture on the greenback?
Well, I think he had his picture on the greenback. I, uh, I've said a few. That didn't bother me to have Chase's picture on there. He's better looking than me, and uh, I think someone said that I was so ugly that I abused the privilege.
Well, you do make it onto the bill, and then the only living president to be on our currency in this country. Pretty impressive feat.
Yeah, that's a trick of God, to put my face on something that became so popular. They were called Lincoln dollars, paper money,
Mm.
which is a new thing. Chase did just a wonderful job working not only with Sherman, but some people uh, in the stock market, and they put together just all kinds of plans to keep our country fluid. When frankly there were times we had no money, no money at all.
Uh, Hopefully, we'll be back on gold soon, but and silver.
I don't know about that. Once you start something like that, it's hard to stop. Mm. And we don't have to stop.
I'm meeting with you today on a happy occasion, but it hasn't always been such a happy occasion, being commander in chief. How have you dealt with those challenges?
I think there are challenges that you know are coming at you, and then challenges that come up immediately. I think the first thing, of course, is never panic. Panic is about the worst thing you can do. And you have to take the time to understand, get the data, understand it. And the pace of that varies, of course, but you have to go through those steps. And while I wasn't maybe the world's greatest politician when I came to Washington, and certainly I had never led an army, there were people to help me with that. I was a great visitor to libraries to read books, and I did that. So you confront what there is, learn about it, get advice, and then go forward.
Your tragedies were not just in the professional realm, but in the personal. And while we don't need to dwell on that, your son did serve under General Grant. Um, how has this toll of the war affected your family life, and your wife in particular?
Well, when we left for Washington, we left behind our little boy Eddie in a grave in Springfield. And then 2 years into the war, Willie and Tad both became sick. And little Willie at age 12 died. Tad was sick and he recovered. Willie is held in Washington to be later buried in Springfield, eventually with our family. Those were hard. Of course, as bad as Mary and I felt for the young men that were dying, the loss of a child brings it home more than you can ever imagine. On a personal level, Mary has not recovered. She wears black. In honor of that, I wear black, and I'm going to wear black until the war ended. Maybe you'll see me in a white suit someday. So it took such a toll. So many people. So horrible. We don't know how many were lost. Estimates vary on both sides. The horrible number is about 600,000, and I'm sure that number will grow as we know more and more. I hate to think about it. It may exceed 700,000. Horrible.
Many of those that served and many of those that died did not have a choice in whether they served or not. You, having position, were able to decide whether your son served. How did you come to a decision to allow him to join the war effort?
Robert, excuse me, Robert was in school at Harvard, and he begged to go into the army. So initially, um, really considering Mary's feelings, I held off on that. When he graduated, I was able to convince Mary, and he became a captain on Grant's staff. I yes, I thought I took him out of the line of fire, but in that job, he served as a courier a number of times and did come under fire. And he's home with us now. He came home uh, after the surrender, and he has breakfast with us every day. He's a fine young man, and I think he's going to have a good future. I hope it's not in politics.
I He seems to have been quite the witness to history as he gets to be on a courier for General Grant and is at the surrender
Yes,
at Appomattox.
yeah, he's at that house, and in the background when Grant came in and accepted the surrender of Robert E. Lee. Lee Lee's a good man. and he was put in an intolerable position. We offered him the leadership of our army, and I think, had he led our army, uh, the war would have ended much sooner. For two reasons: he would have been leading for us and not leading for them.
Right. As we sit here, the
Hmm.
war is all but over. What is your vision for Reconstruction of the South and rebuilding of the Union?
That is something in recent weeks, as we saw the war coming to an end. Jefferson Davis, I believe, has still not believed the war has ended. We'll catch up with him, and he'll know then. So we studied what we're going to be faced with on what will be called Reconstruction. And there was much damage in the South. We will focus on that. I look forward to be involved in the planning of that. Our biggest challenge, quite frankly, will be the assimilation of former slaves into society, you might say. They uh, they have been treated so poorly, and it won't always be the color of their skin. It's the fact that they were denied education, that they were denied other sources of education apart from formal schools, and that will be our biggest challenge, and it must be met. They will, I believe, they will have jobs. Only now they will be paid for them and not enslaved. But overall, I think that that's going to take. I think it'll take a few decades, frankly. And quite honestly, the North uh, has quite a few prejudices too.
Mm.
Personally, I do want to say that I came to know the black people, the colored people, so much better, and my knowledge. I don't believe you will find me being prejudiced, at least not deliberately so. But I did find people like Frederick Douglass in the work he was doing, and others on that worked with him, that I have no fears at all, giving the opportunity that there's no question that these people will be fully integrated into our society. But it's going to take, I hope, just a few decades. It doesn't run on forever.
Mm. During your time in Congress, you spoke out against armed conflict
Yes.
when it came to
Yeah.
Mexico.
Yeah.
Uh, by all accounts, you were not intending to be a wartime president.
No.
Um, what do you feel your biggest misstep may have been, and what was your best decision that you may have made?
Just to address my congressional term, at that time, Polk had taken us to war with Mexico, which I thought was a big mistake. It was something, basically, it was a land grab, and somehow the view was that Mexico had transgressed on our property, and I kept saying, "Show me the spot, show me the spot." they got they got so tired of hearing that I was known as Spotty Lincoln. I believe I was right. I did not elected to be a war president. I had hoped being president I could negotiate peace. At that time, I would not have been going to negotiations saying slavery must end, as I had to do some years later. So you ask for my worst decision.
Yeah.
Uh, I, it's better to leave that to historians. I think you can find that there's no doubt I will be criticized for my selection of generals.
Mm.
Rightly so. I'll get on their side and criticize myself for that. Uh, there are so many decisions that are made. And I'm not complaining about that. That's the job of a president. Uh, so I think history will decide that. And on the other side, personal decisions. And I'd like to start with a very personal decision, and that was my decision to marry Todd.
Mm.
Uh, Mary has been a great supporter of mine from day one. There's a good possibility I would not have been president without Mary's support and the fine family uh, she gave me. But I would also like to say and broaden it to all the women in the war. Again, history will, I hope, bring out their part. Not only did they, not only were women plowing fields that their husbands plowed before, doing carpentry, blacksmithing, they filled in all the time in some cases where their children were also in the army. Uh, I had a line one time that I wish I had directed to memory, but again, it's something like this. If you take all the words of all the poets and all the writers throughout history that wouldn't compare to the praise and love we owe these women and their sacrifice.
Was there anything that truly surprised you during the war?
We would have to start with Sumter being fired on. You know, we first tried to send the ship in to reinforce Sumter. You know, no, they said, but they didn't fire on that. So they were on that little island, hardly an island, in the middle of the bay. So we tried to, we thought, well, we'll just send food in, supplies, medicine.
Mm.
And then they fired on Sumter, wouldn't let it enter at all. That that was a big surprise, even as I said earlier. Let's get back to that question. I talked about the ladies, and you wanted to know about people like Grant
Yeah.
and my advisors. Grant and I became quite friendly, and I would visit him at City Point, and occasionally he would come to the Capitol. Just a few weeks ago, he and I attended a play at Ford's Theater.
Mm.
I hope we can do. I hope we can do that again. Uh, he's a great man. In in the White House itself, I had three young advisors. Primarily, my secretaries were John Hay uh, and John Nicolay. Uh, they were, and sometimes they were a crutch on this side and a crutch
Mm.
on the other side in lifting the load I faced. I kept ungodly hours. I would wake one or both of them up at night, and they'd look up and see this tall man dressed in a long night dress. Uh, they not only were at the White House, but I would send them on missions, and they essentially were my eyes and ears in the field. I did not deliberately get out much. I made an exception when I went to Gettysburg to dedicate that battlefield for those who died in that July battle. We gave a little talk there. Some people liked it. Some people thought had hopes that it would they were dishwatery remarks that would soon pass
Mm.
from the history.
A little short for my taste. Who was your most trusted advisor? Who does Abraham Lincoln go to when he needs
uh, it's hard to pick one, and I hope you carefully edit this part. Seward uh, became a most trusted advisor. In the beginning, I think he looked at me as this man from the backwoods, as Easterners have a tendency to do for anyone in the West. Chicago's a very sophisticated city, but you're still from the West. So he effectively, I think, thought he was going to be a prime minister.
it?
And I had a little work shed talk with him about that, and and assured him there's only one president. We changed his mind. He was a very trusted advisor. Chase, as I say, depending on the subject, was a trusted advisor. He wasn't advising me how not to run again or anything like that. The Wells, looking over the waters for us, did a wonderful job. And Grant, of course. Grant, I hope, will be involved in politics. He would make a good leader for this country. There was talk of him having him run against me in 1864, and he immediately turned it down. Uh, and you may remember that things do not look good for me being reelected into the fall. And the thing that really turned things around is when Sherman took Atlanta, and that ended basically any chance of McClellan. And it's interesting, McClellan, as loved as he was by the men in uniform, I got the vast majority of men in uniform when the ballots came in. And I even wrote a note in August, which I wanted to be read by the cabinet if I lost, but I was writing it ahead of time to know the thinking I had. And in it, I said, "We have lost. It is now our duty to do everything we can in every possible way to end this war by March 4th, the day of inaugurating a new president." Because I felt that McClellan and much of the Democratic Party in their platform alluded to a negotiated settlement. We could not have that. I had them sign the back of their note, and then when things turned out, I read the first part.
On a personal level and a national level, I think you've alluded to this quite a bit. Has your presidency and the war been worth the sacrifices that we've made?
I pray to God that it is. I have no way of knowing. I'm a realist, you might say. Uh, I think we should realize, and I hope history realizes, that it would not have been a southern United States, a confederacy, and a union. Their confederacy was already falling apart. They would not have been one nation. We would have had a conglomeration of some size of countries in this geographical area. So we would not have had the means to be the great nation I believe we can become. So it was far more serious than taken out. That they were already losing states, and they already had the border states that they never did have in the Union. And it would be much like South America is shaping up, a bunch of little countries. So if we held the Union together, uh, and as Franklin once said when we passed the Declaration, if we can hold it, I hope the Civil War showed we can't hold it. I hope people sitting in the president's chair continue to do that. If they do, our country is going to grow and grow and grow. We have so many wonderful people. We have so many resources. I am pushing for immigration. We need those people. We can't grow without immigration. Our West is opening up. Those territories are going to become states. One of the things I'm looking forward to is we got approval for our transcontinental railroad.
Yeah.
How I look forward to riding that train out to California, and I look forward to that. I think it'll happen just within a few years,
Mm.
further opening it up.
Well, I want to thank you very much for speaking with me today and I would like to congratulate you again on the end of the war and look forward to the rebuilding of the South and the opening up of the West. I think we're going to have a great future.
I think people like yourself that are getting the facts and then disseminating the facts are doing a great job for our country. And I thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us on the Soldiers and Sailors Monument podcast. Uh, if you'd like to come down to the monument and see our tributes to Lincoln, we are open daily, 10 to 5:30, and you can find more about all of our special events and more podcasts like this at soldiersandsailors.com. Thanks again, and thank you.
Thank you.